I appreciate you making time for us, especially on the first week of a new session. Let me just start by asking how things are going.
Things are going well. We started the redistricting map. Seems like some people are happy and some people aren't, but that's the way it goes, I guess. I don't think anybody's ever been completely happy in any redistricting that's been done in the state of Tennessee or anywhere else.
Would you maybe break down that legal requirement for redistricting, what it looks like and why it's needed?
Well, I guess there's different requirements depending on the different maps. So, congressional maps have one, and the state house maps and Senate maps have a different. So if there's one in particular you want me to address, I'll be happy to.
It looks like for the time being, most of the eyes are on the congressional proposals. So, and I'll just hop right into it. I was reading that the Senate Republicans have unveiled their proposal largely matches the proposal by House Republicans. And from what I'm understanding, it splits the 5th district, meaning Nashville and Davidson County, into multiple districts. I guess, could you explain why that's a good thing in your view?
Well, so to answer your first question, is one of the things in the congressional maps you have to watch for is the Voting Rights Act and not violating the Voting Rights Act. There's only one majority-minority congressional district in the state of Tennessee, and that's the 9th district. So we upheld the Voting Rights Act. That's required. We're within the limits of the law. We feel very confident about that. We also feel confident this is constitutional. Our map didn't pair any sitting congressmen together. The Democrats put forth one that paired David Kustoff with Steve Cohen in the Democrat district and paired Congressman Desjardins and John Rose in the district. So, they can argue what they want to argue. What I will say is the population in Upper East Tennessee decreased and the population in West Tennessee decreased, which means that those districts have to get bigger. So East has to move West and West have to move East. So as we started doing that, then that developed and changed what we had to do in Middle Tennessee. We do it based off census block data. And so that's what we use to determine what the districts would look like. And we drew the 5th district last. And that's just sort of what was remaining by the time we got through drawing the other parts.
And I know it's not been voted on at this point in time, but we know cities typically have more minority voices than our rural counties. And so I guess, could you explain maybe how does this not split up minority voices or water down their choice for representation?
Well, I think the current 5th congressional district was 32% minority participation. The new 5th congressional district is 27% minority participation. People are assuming that minorities only vote Democrat. They don't. They also vote Republican, especially the Hispanic population. And so I think that's important to remember. People are assuming that it's all Democrat votes. It is not. But I think what happens in Davidson County, my belief is that in Shelby County, you have Representative Kustoff, who does represent parts of the city of Memphis in Shelby County. And he also represents parts of rural part of Northwest Tennessee. I don't really think it's been an issue for him to represent both. I don't hear anybody complaining that he's done anything wrong or he doesn't understand the issues. And so I think having 3 congressmen potentially from Davidson County in Washington will actually help Nashville and Davidson County a lot more in Washington. You have a chance to have someone on both sides of the aisle working for you. You also have a chance to have people on multiple committees fighting for you. I don't see it as a bad thing. I see it as a positive thing. But, at the end, the minority population that they're complaining about is from 32% to 27%. In the state house, I think the rules is you have whole counties. If you have a whole county, then you can't split it. That's Washington and Greene and East Tennessee and Knox. And you can't split those counties. You also have where the courts have said we can split no more than 30 counties in the state house map. And so you also have to protect majority minority districts. There were 13 in the state. When we drew our map, there's still 13 in our state. There's also something called coalition districts, which is they're majority minority, but they're not dominantly African American, but they're majority minority districts. And we added a coalition district in Davidson County. So once again, we abided by all the decisions that the courts have made to lay out how we need to draw our map. I don't have anybody complaining that we did anything unconstitutional or we violated any Voting Rights Act. At the end, once again, we think we made a constitutional map that will be upheld in court if they decide that they want to sue. It's a waste of money, in my opinion, but if that's what they want to try to do, so be it.
So if you were from Knox County and you lived here all your life, would you notice any change from all this redistricting?
I mean, you would know the same because Knox County's changed. So your representative may move a little bit, not all districts stayed the same. And so, depending on where your population is, things have to shift internally in Knoxville. And so the same number of seats are in Knox County, but those districts have changed. For example, Eddie Manis districts changed a little bit. Sam McKenzie's has changed a little bit. And so those districts changed because of population. In the House, we do have a variance that we can use. About 5% variance. So there's about 70,000 people in a House district, but we can go plus or minus 5%. In the congressional, we can't have a variance. You have to go down to the per person. Everybody has to have the same population. So once again, we follow the laws, and we believe like we will be upheld in court if anybody decides to challenge us.
What changes might we expect this session in school funding?
Well, I had a conversation with the governor and lieutenant governor today, which was Thursday after session, and I think the governor's plan is to take a very complicated BEP formula and try to make it more simple where people can understand it. It's not as convoluted as the other one. So I think that's his primary direction. He also wants to increase the base funding in K through 12 education significantly. We haven't heard a dollar amount, but I'm sure it's coming at the state. We also heard that he wants to have a little bit of a formula in there where if you're in a low poverty area or high poverty area, you're in a high poverty area, maybe you get additional resources in the BEP funding to help with that because you need some additional resources. But we also talked about how we need to have some kind of outcomes-based approach, because right now in our BEP at formula, we pay every school system the same amount, regardless if they're high performing or low performing. And so what we want to do is in the base amount, that's great. Pay everybody the same based on how many kids they have, a little bit difference depending on if you have high poverty or high special needs population. Completely understand that you may need additional dollars, but we also need to reward those schools in a different pot of money who are high excel, who are very high end areas that have high success rates with their students. We need to reward those schools. It's not fair to pay those high schools who have great numbers and making a difference in students' life the same as the worst schools in our state.
Well, Speaker, I guess why not invest more in the districts that are struggling? I was reading about the performance-based initiative, and I guess maybe it's the first time I've heard of that proposal. Typically, you see a need, you try to meet it, and then I guess you're not suggesting that the underperforming districts are going to get shorthanded. They're just not going to maybe get this boost in funding.
Well, what I'm saying is in the base funding, everybody gets treated the same. You have some parameters in there, special needs, high poverty areas, but all the schools get treated the same in that endeavor. But there will be hopefully a different pot of money for school systems who are the best, who are doing great things, and that they should be rewarded for doing great things. But what you do see is the two struggling school systems in our state is Davison and Shelby County that spend just as much per student as the best schools. So funding is not an issue in those areas because they're spending just as much as the best schools. Their problem usually is leadership and having a lack of leadership that will turn those schools around. Money will not solve their problem. In those poor schools, they're not in the rural areas, they're in our urban areas where they are spending a lot of money. And so that's something that we have to continue to discuss and look at. But it's not fair to pay Granger County the same amount as a bad, worst, or the worst in the state, Shelby County. That's just not fair to Granger County. And if they're doing great things, they should be rewarded for that, not de-incentivized.
And I also know that there is some proposed legislation over truth in sentencing. A lot of victims' families, they get the verdict they're wanting, but maybe they don't really know when that end date is. So what's coming on that front?
Yeah, so we're having discussions. So, there's nothing worse for a victim or the victim's family when the judge or jury says for an aggravated robbery, for example, we're going to give you a 10-year sentence. And then you figure out a couple years later that they only have to serve 30, 40, 50% of that sentence. It's not really truth in sentencing. And so what we want to do is for those hard crimes, those violent crimes, make it truth in sentencing 100%. If you commit a heinous violent crime, you should serve every bit of it. And the victim's family should know that if you get 10, it's 10. But we also should have the capability of helping people, and that's why we put in drug courts, help people who have drug issues to get into a recovery program and not go to jail. We also need to have mental health courts. People have mental health issues where they don't go to jail, where they can get the help that they need in mental health. Our prisons are full of patients who have mental health issues, 70 to 80% in local jails and 35% in state penitentiaries. So there's things that we can do in criminal justice reform, not to just focus on truth and sentencing, but really try to make a difference in people's lives and get them the help that they need, especially juveniles, trying to do juvenile intervention, because career criminals start in juvenile for the most of the time. And so if we can create a program that can get them out of that life of crime and back into school and back into mentorship and turn their life around, we need to invest in that as well.